Let's start with a truth that LSAT courses don't typically say out loud. If your score isn't improving, it's not because you're not trying. It's not because you're not smart enough. And it's definitely not because law school is out of reach. It's because you're approaching your prep like most people do. You're working hard, feeling stressed, but you're making zero progress. I've seen it over and over again. Since 2005, I've coached thousands of LSAT students, first-gen applicants, Ivy League grads, working parents, full-time undergrads, paralegals, engineers, you name it. Some walked in scoring 170 plus cold. Others started in the 130s and told me flat out, I don't think I can do this. And you know what I learned? It's not natural talent. It's not background. It's not even how many hours they studied. The ones who made the leap, sometimes 20, 30, even 40 points, had something else. They learned to stop using broken prep strategies and instead start using a system that actually worked for them. They studied differently, they thought differently, and they showed up differently. And that difference changed everything. Now here is the simplest way to think about your LSAT prep. Every point comes at a cost. Not money, but time, energy, focus, and confidence. And whether you realize it or not, you're already spending all four of those. So if your score isn't rising, it means you're spending your resources in the wrong place. Now, after 20 years of watching thousands of students prep for the LSAT, I've seen four distinct patterns emerge, and you're using one or more of them right now. The first is the past work trap, hoping that what you did before still counts. This student will say, I already went through the textbooks, I took a prep class 3 months ago, I've watched hundreds of hours of videos and read every thread on Reddit. So they assume that because they've done the work, now they just need to keep going. Now, let me be blunt. This isn't college anymore. There's no curve, there's no extra credit, and you don't get a trophy just for participating. The LSAT is a live performance, and that doesn't care what you used to do. You're not being tested on whether you studied hard 3 months ago. You're being tested on whether you can perform right now under timed conditions with zero margin for error. Past effort is like last semester's GPA. It might make you feel better, but it's not going to help this semester. You can't move forward if you're still relying on what you've already done. And if that effort didn't change your score before, repeating it isn't suddenly going to start working now. I know this might be hard to hear, but I hope that at the same time it can be liberating for you now. You don't have to keep dragging your old prep behind you. You can cut it loose and build something that works now. The second big type of investment is the daily grind illusion, mistaking activity for progress. And these students are often the most frustrated because they're studying every day, they're putting in the hours, and they're doing the work, but nothing's changing. Why? Because a lot of LSAT-related activity doesn't actually translate to getting better at the LSAT. Most students are just taking random sections without actually reviewing anything. They're going over the same question types they already understand. They're taking full exams without fixing their mistakes, and they're endlessly taking notes with no real clear strategy behind it all. They're moving, but they're not necessarily moving forward. It's like building a legal argument just by collecting case law without organizing your claims. You might be working, but there's no clear direction. Now here's what real progress looks like instead. It could involve isolating your weak areas and drilling them with intention. It could involve timing yourself under real conditions. It could involve reviewing why you got questions wrong, not just what the right answer is. And it could involve recognizing patterns in your errors and then adjusting. And I know that the grind feels safe, it feels familiar, and it certainly feels productive. But if your score hasn't changed in weeks, you're not really grinding, you're just spinning your wheels. Now, the third big kind of investment is the future fix fantasy, hoping that next week will somehow be different. And this is the most dangerous one. You say things like, I'll get serious after my midterms, or once my internship ends, then I'll have more time, or I'll start fresh next month, like the first of the month is magically different from the 30th or the 31st. You're not actually going to fix it in the future, because the way you prep right now is your prep system. If you're constantly rescheduling your study time, skipping your review, or avoiding the hard sections you should be working on, your future self will do the exact same thing. This is the law school applicant who keeps saying, I'll write my personal statement over vacation, and ends up sending in a rough draft 2 minutes before the deadline. Waiting doesn't build momentum. It builds pressure, and pressure is what breaks you. You don't need more time, you need a real process. Plateaus on the LSAT don't happen because you aren't smart enough. They happen because you never stay on one approach long enough to let it pay off. You read one book, try a few sections, then you freak out when it doesn't click immediately. Then you abandon it altogether, you search Reddit, find a new trick, then restart the same cycle. Back at square one, again and again and again. That is the non-compounding cycle. It feels like work, it feels like progress, but it's just noise. It's movement without getting any real momentum. If you want to break through, your first job isn't to find a new method, it's to stop abandoning the one you're already on. You've got to stick it out. There are two things that drive real long-term score increases. The first is deliberate practice, and the second is structured feedback loops. Let's talk about deliberate practice first. This isn't just doing a lot of questions. That's what most people do, and it's why most people stay average. Deliberate practice means you know exactly which skills you're targeting, like flaw recognition, main point identification, or conditional logic. You isolate those skills in drills where you push just beyond your comfort zone, where it's hard but not impossible. Then you reflect immediately afterwards and write down your key takeaways. Then you wrap that into a feedback loop where you log every mistake, not just what the right answer was, but why you fell for that trap. Then you revisit your mistake log weekly to look for patterns, and you create mini drills specifically to address those weak points. And finally, you check in with a coach or a tutor, or maybe your study buddy, who helps you course correct. That's how elite performers train in every domain, whether it's sports, music, chess, and yes, LSAT prep. Now, a huge trap I see students fall into is thinking the perfect study plan is the answer. They'll spend hours researching which book to use, or debating whether to start with logical reasoning or reading comp, or asking themselves, what is the best schedule for someone who works part-time and has 6 months? But here's the truth. Most study plans will work if you actually stick to them. The search for the perfect plan is often fear in disguise. It's easier to switch plans than it is to face the discomfort of not making progress yet. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need a good enough plan that you execute flawlessly for several weeks at a time. It is not about finding the best tactic. It's about mastering one tactic long enough to actually see results. Now let's zoom out for a minute. The LSAT is not a test of raw intelligence, but it is a test of pattern recognition under pressure. And pattern recognition only comes through repeated exposure and deep reflection. It rewards students who can tolerate frustration without shutting down completely, if you're willing to suck at it temporarily because you know it'll pay off later. So if your brain hurts after a deep review session, that is not a problem. It's a sign that the process is actually working. Now, if you miss, say, 8 out of 25 questions in logical reasoning, that is not a sign to panic. That's a sign that you've got to slow down and analyze your mistakes. Not just what the right answers were, but how the test makers lured you into choosing the wrong ones. You win the game of the LSAT by being okay with feeling dumb, because that discomfort is where the growth happens. Now let's get tactical here. Most students feel like they're studying by watching videos, reading explanations, or scrolling through Reddit, but that is passive. Passive studying might make you feel productive, but it doesn't actually build your LSAT muscles. Active studying is where you read the argument and you predict the flaw before looking at the answers, or maybe you finish a section, then you write out the reasoning behind every wrong answer you picked, or maybe you're categorizing every mistake you make by type, or maybe you're creating your own mini drills to retest weak areas rather than repeating the full section again and again, hoping for a better result. Now, of course, the active approach takes more work and more time, but that's exactly why it works. Now, here's one more way to think about it. Your LSAT success doesn't come from collecting tools, it comes from sharpening one tool repeatedly. You don't need 6 books, 4 courses, 3 tutors and 20 different tactics. You just need one clear method, and you've got to sharpen that method until it slices through every question type on instinct. That's what happens when you build reps. Not 10 questions, not 50 questions, but hundreds of them, reviewed, logged, reflected on, and re-drilled. That's what separates 170 scorers from everyone else. They don't know more, they've just trained deeper. Now, if you're feeling stuck right now, have you ever been stuck between two choices on the LSAT and thought to yourself, they both seem right, so which one is actually wrong? Yeah, I'm talking about that moment. It's the worst. But it happens all the time. You read the question, you narrow it down, and then you freeze. Two choices, one has to be right, but they both kinda make sense. That's what I call the 50-50 trap. And here's the truth. It's not that you don't understand logic, it's that the LSAT is designed to make you second guess yourself. So today, I want to give you 3 concrete tactics to handle that moment without guessing, without panicking, and without wasting minutes staring at the screen. These are the exact strategies I teach my own students, and they've helped people jump from the 140s into the 170s. Of course, these results are not guaranteed. Everyone's starting point is different, and your results will depend on your effort, your consistency, and how you apply the strategies. The first tactic is to diagram. When the choices involve formal logic, and I'm talking here if-then statements, you want to diagram them. I know it sounds like something from an intro logic class, but this is not about drawing fancy flowcharts. It's about seeing what's really being said. Let me give you an example. Suppose one choice says, if a company increases advertising, then sales will rise. And the other says, only if the company increases advertising will sales rise. They might sound identical, but they're not. In logical terms, they're actually saying the reverse of each other. One is saying A leads to B, the other is saying that B requires A. And if you don't write it down or sketch it out, you might end up just guessing. The LSAT is full of these traps. Same words, but the logic is flipped around. And that's why so many students think they're close, but they still miss the question. So here's the key takeaway. If you're stuck between two choices that both involve conditions, slow down and draw it, even if it takes you 15 seconds, because the people who consistently score 170 and above know they need to go back to basics and they diagram when it counts. And if those words like unless, only if, or requires still trip you up, that's okay. It just means it's something for you to work on. It's not a flaw, it's just a skill that you haven't mastered yet. Now, the second tactic is something that almost nobody does, but it makes a huge difference. It's this, to compare the two answer choices directly. Not, does this one match the stimulus? And then, does that one match the stimulus? I'm talking about looking at them side by side and asking yourself, what is the difference between these two? Now, let's say you're down to these. Choice B says, the argument confuses a necessary condition for a sufficient one. And choice D says, the argument assumes that what's true of the parts is true of the whole. At first glance, they might both sound good, but they're pointing to completely different logical issues. So instead of picking the one that feels right, do this. Pause and break them down. What is choice B accusing the argument of doing? And what is choice D accusing it of? Then look at the stimulus and ask yourself, which of those things actually happened in the argument? This stops you from guessing, and it gets you thinking critically. Because here's what most students do. They look at each choice on its own in a vacuum. But the LSAT is testing your ability to see small differences. Sometimes it's a shift in verb tense. Sometimes one says some and the other says most. Sometimes one says supports the conclusion and the other says is the conclusion. And these differences matter. They're not just word games. They're how the test traps you. So if you're ever stuck between two, don't just ask yourself which one is right. Ask yourself, how are these two actually different? And that question changes everything. Now, tactic 3 is the most powerful of them all. And I'll be honest, most people don't do this one because it feels slow. But if you care about accuracy, this is the one. Here it is. Check every single word in the answer choice, every single one, and ask yourself, does the stimulus justify this? I know it sounds intense, but stay with me here. Here's what this looks like. Let's say the stimulus says, most cats like fish, and the choice says, most animals like fish. I know it's a subtle difference, but cats is a smaller group than animals, so that would be an overgeneralization. Now here's another one. If the stimulus says, some researchers believe, and the answer says, all researchers believe, again, big difference. And this is what the LSAT writers do. They change one word, just one word, and then the whole thing falls apart. So here's the rule. If even one word goes beyond what the stimulus supports, eliminate it. This tactic is perfect for the Socratic review method. When you're going over questions slowly after a timed section, that's when you train your brain to spot these traps, because you start to see patterns, like how wrong answers often use absolutes, like always, never, everyone, and must, while correct answers are oftentimes more cautious, some, often, might, and can. This is especially the case for inference questions like must be true, most supported, and necessary assumption questions. I know it's subtle, but once you start seeing it, you'll never unsee it. Now remember that getting stuck between two answers doesn't mean you're bad at this. It just means you need a system for handling that moment. These tactics I shared today are habits, and like any habit, they get easier with practice. But if you apply these consistently, you'll stop saying, I was down to 2, and instead you'll start saying, I knew exactly why the wrong answer was wrong. And that is how your score starts to rise, not by doing 20 more practice tests.
2 to a 175. Now, what I've seen is that plateaus can happen to anyone. They certainly happen to me. Maybe you've seen quick improvements early on. You jumped from the 150s to the low 160s, but then you hit a wall. Weeks go by, but your score is still glued to 165. Why does this happen? A lot of the time, it's not about what you know, but how you apply it under real LSAT conditions. You might be focusing on the wrong metrics, like finishing all the questions instead of getting them right, or maybe you're burning through practice tests without dissecting your mistakes deeply enough. Now, a lot of students make the mistake of prioritizing speed over accuracy. Trying to get through every single question at breakneck speed usually tanks your score. The LSAT rewards precision, not value. Or it could be that you're only engaging in a surface level review, because just skimming the explanations is not going to fix the repeated errors. You've got to find the root cause. Maybe you misread a subtle phrase, or you jumped to a conclusion that was not supported by the evidence. Or maybe you don't have any targeted strategy, or maybe it's all three of these. But doing endless full-length tests will just reinforce bad habits. It's much better to drill specific weaknesses than to aimlessly do more of the same. To break through that 165 plateau, adopt the following principle. Fewer questions, better answers. That might sound counterintuitive, but here's the logic. If you do fewer questions with near perfect accuracy, you'll typically outscore someone who tries all the questions but gets sloppy. Over time, as you build up your mastery, speed will increase organically. It is a natural consequence. Accuracy, though, is the foundation that will fuel your long-term score gains. Now, here's how you can break through that plateau. Step 1, redefine your section-by-section strategy. In logical reasoning, if you're consistently missing 6 questions per section, try focusing on the first 20. Master those. Even if you leave the last 5 blank, with guessing of course, you could still get a higher score than if you rush through all 25. In reading comp, you might want to dive deep into 3 passages instead of speeding through all 4. Aim for near perfect accuracy, then guess on the final passage if your time is tight. Again, this is not forever, it's just for now to prioritize accuracy over speed in the short term. Then you engage in a deep dive review, you pinpoint the breakdown. Was your mistake in the argument, the question, or the answer choice? Then retry the problem without even looking at the choices and predict the solution in your own words. Then you're documenting mistakes, keeping a detailed log of what went wrong and why. Over time, you're going to see patterns emerge. For example, maybe you consistently misread qualifiers like most or some. You might also want to engage in some untimed drills for mastery. In logical reasoning, you might try reading the stimulus slowly and paraphrasing it, because if you can't put it into your own words, that means you're moving too fast. In reading comp, Same deal, you read the passage, but maybe here you're going to summarize the main argument before looking at the questions, because if you can't confidently explain the passage, it's worth a reread. Then you gradually reintroduce timing while making sure you can maintain high accuracy. Then you slowly reduce the time till you're back at the standard constraint.
Now, I wanted to share a quick disclaimer before we go any further. The stories I'm about to share are real. These are real students I've worked with personally, but their results are not typical. They were committed, they followed the plan, and they didn't cut corners. And most LSAT students, generally speaking, don't improve their scores because they don't put in the work. These students also brought a level of consistency and coachability that most students don't bring on their own. Your score and your results will depend entirely on your consistency, your effort, and your ability to implement what actually works. With that being said, though, let me show you what transformation can look like when it's done right. Now, the fourth type of investment is the new strategy shift, where I'm going to share what top scorers do differently. One of my students, we're going to call her Nina, she had every reason to give up. She had a full-time job, 2 kids, 0 free time. She scored in the 140s on her first diagnostic, and she told me, I'm not sure law school is realistic for me. But instead of giving up, she got strategic. She didn't try to study 3 hours a day. She didn't download 5 new apps. She didn't rewatch the same old videos hoping they'd finally click. She found one window in her day, 45 minutes early in the morning before her kids woke up, and we built everything around that. Her system looked like the following: 1 logical reasoning concept per week, timed drills, not full sections, end of week Socratic review method, no distractions, no fluff, all execution. She made this a non-negotiable in her life. And in just 3 months, she went from the 140s to the 160s. And she walked into test day ready and then walked out knowing she had finally crushed it. Again, Nina's story is not typical, but it's possible. Now, another student of mine, let's call him David, he was stuck in a loop. He'd taken the LSAT twice, and his scores hovered in the low 150s. He was studying 3 hours a night, taking full exams every weekend, reading Reddit for ideas on strategy, but he still remained stuck. And I asked him to show me exactly what he was doing. And here's what I saw: no review system, no pattern tracking, switching methods constantly, and studying when he was already mentally drained. He was doing everything, but getting nothing in return. So we flipped it around. Instead, we transitioned him to do 1 section per sitting, targeted review using the Socratic review method, no full exams for an entire month, clear goals each week, less time put in, better focus combined with real feedback. In 10 weeks, he jumped from a 152 to a 170 and got into Northwestern Law on a scholarship. Again, disclaimer, David's story is real, but his outcome is not guaranteed. He followed the process exactly, showed up every day, and asked for help when he needed it. Your score will reflect what you do. Now let's zoom out for a minute. If you're stuck in the 150s or the 160s, you don't need more time. You need a better system. You're probably already spending at least 5-10 hours a week on your LSAT prep. So the problem isn't the hours, it's the quality of those hours. So ask yourself, are you reviewing your weak areas or the areas you're already strong? Are you reviewing your wrong answers or just moving on? Are you following a plan or are you reacting to anxiety? And if you're not sure about that, that itself is a sign. You're prepping like a student, not a future lawyer. The LSAT is a stress test, not just of logic, but of your approach. And law schools can see the difference in your scores. Now remember, you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be a genius, and you certainly don't have to study 6 hours a day. You just need to stop leaking time into bad strategies, and instead, start using what actually works. You're not stuck, you're just one good system away.